In the heart of Nova Orleans, where jazz echoes through the cobblestone streets and the aromas of coffee and beignets waft through the air, Isaac Carter felt invisible. It was his first year at St. Bernard Academy, a prestigious private school, very different from the lively halls of the public school he had attended before. Tall, thin, and introspective, Isaac was always a boy of few words, but his mind overflowed with melodies. He had grown up with the sound of his father's saxophone, which played in jazz bars at night and worked as a bus driver during the day. For Isaac, music was a refuge, a language that spoke for him when words failed him. But no one at St. Bernard knew that. To his classmates and teachers, he was just the new guy, and a new guy who didn't seem to fit in. The history teacher, Senora Wainwright, was a stern-looking woman with hair tied into an impeccable bun and thin-rimmed glasses that seemed to see right through people. His standards were high and his patience was short. From day one, Isaac noticed that she favored certain students, the children of business people, politicians, and the school's distinguished alumni. He, on the other hand, was treated with indifference, his responses often ignored or downplayed. That morning, while leafing through his notebook, Isaac felt the teacher's gaze on him. "Mr. Carter, perhaps you can enlighten us. What was the cultural impact of the Harlem Renaissance on American society?" The room fell silent. Isaac knew the answer. Of course he did. He had read Langston Hughes, heard Duke Ellington on his father's old records. But when she raised her voice to respond, she noticed a half-smile on the teacher's lips, as if she was already expecting a mistake. "It was a cultural movement that—" "Louder, please, Mr. Carter. We are all eager to hear." Muffled laughter erupted among the students. Heat rose to Isaac's face. He hated public speaking. Music had always been his voice, but now, under the watchful eyes, his own voice seemed to escape him. The Harlem Renaissance helped redefine African-American identity through art, literature, and music. It was a period of cultural expression and— "Is that all?" interrupted the teacher, raising an eyebrow. Isaac clutched the notebook between his fingers. He knew she wanted him to stumble, to show hesitation to reinforce the idea that he didn't belong there. No, it was a period of resistance. Black artists showed the world that they had a voice, and no one could ignore them. Mrs. Wainwright's gaze narrowed slightly, but before he could respond, the bell rang. "All right, class. We'll continue tomorrow. Mr. Carter, stay a moment." The students began to leave, some whispering and laughing. Isaac remained in place, feeling the tension in the air. The teacher crossed her arms. "I heard your father plays the saxophone. Do you also play?" Isaac blinked in surprise. "Yes, a little." "Excellent. So tomorrow, before class, you will do us the favor of entertaining us with a small presentation." It was an order, not a request. Isaac felt his stomach turn. This was not an invitation to show your talent. It was a trap. But he wasn't going to back down. He just nodded, picked up his notebook, and left the room, already feeling the weight of the next day on his shoulders. Isaac spent the afternoon sitting on his porch, holding the saxophone his father had given him when he was 10. The instrument gleamed in the light of the setting sun, but what had once been a refuge now felt like a weight. "Do you look like that because something happened at school or because you didn't wash the dishes?" His father's deep, hoarse voice broke the silence. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. Isaac sighed and told him what had happened. The father listened in silence, scratching his gray beard. "So she wants you to play in front of the class, and you think it's a trap?" Isaac nodded. "Maybe it is. But the question is, are you afraid of making mistakes, or are you afraid of getting it right?" He didn't know how to answer. The next morning, when he entered school, he felt eyes on him. The rumor had already spread. "So, Carter, are you going to play something or just make noise?" These Troy Matthews, one of the most popular boys, with a mocking smile. Isaac ignored him and continued down the hall. He found Elena, a classmate who was one of the few who didn't treat him with disdain. "Do you really play the saxophone?" she asked, curious. "Yes." "Then show them." Just like that. No hesitation, no fear. But it wasn't that simple for him. When the bell rang, the classroom was different. Professor Wainwright was already at the front, a calculated smile on her face. "Well, Mr. Carter, we're all excited. You can start." He took a deep breath, picked up the saxophone, and placed the mouthpiece between his lips. But before he could start, he heard a muffled laugh from the back of the room. It'll be good for a clown show at the very least. Isaac recognized Troy's voice. A few more laughs arose. The teacher did nothing to interrupt. Isaac closed his eyes. He couldn't back down. Not now. Then, he started playing. The first sound that came from Isaac's saxophone was soft, almost hesitant. But as he took a deep breath and let his fingers run across the keys, the melody took shape. It was a deep, melancholic, soulful blues, something his father played on rainy nights while Isaac listened to it hidden in the hallway. The classroom, once full of whispers and laughter, was filled with tense silence. Professor Wainwright, who had previously seemed to delight in the prospect of failure, leaned forward slightly as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The students who were laughing just a few seconds ago were now exchanging glances. Even Troy, the most mocking one, crossed his arms and frowned. But Isaac wouldn't play for them. Each note was a piece of the story he had never had the courage to tell. The saxophone spoke for him, said everything that his words never could. The weight of feeling like an outsider, the frustration of being judged before he even had the chance to prove himself, the desire to be heard. When he finished, the last chord hung in the air like an echo. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Elena was the first to clap. Then, another student. And another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Some were banging on the table. Others were whistling. But the reaction that mattered most came from Professor Wainwright. She didn't say anything. He just closed the book he had on the table and looked at Isaac, his expression unreadable. "Very well, Mr. Carter. You can sit down." And that was all. No praise, no real recognition, just a dry order. Isaac walked back to his seat, feeling the eyes on him. But this time they were different. He was no longer invisible. Isaac sat, up, still feeling the echoes of the music vibrating inside him. The silence in the room had already dissipated, replaced by murmurs and furtive glances. For the first time, he realized that people were talking about him, not ignoring his presence like before. But Professor Wainwright remained impassive. She resumed class as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just witnessed something that defied her expectations. At the end of class, when the bell rang, the students stood up quickly. Before Isaac could leave, Troy Matthews walked past him and muttered, "Don't think this changes anything." Isaac stared at him without responding, but Elena appeared at his side, smiling. "Actually, I think it changes." In the hallway, other students began to approach. Some simply gave him a look of respect, others commented on the music. A boy he had never spoken to before said, "Man, that was insane. You have to play in the school performance." The idea took him by surprise. He had never imagined himself on a real stage. When he got home, his father was in the kitchen, making gumbo. The smell of spices and hot broth filled the room. "So, how was it?" Isaac hesitated for a moment before responding. "It was different." He talked about what happened, the reaction of his colleagues, and the suggestion for the presentation. His father smiled. "Different can be good. You always had music inside you, son. Maybe it's time to show this to the world." But Isaac still didn't know if he was ready. Music was his voice, but now that people were finally listening, what would he do with it? In the following days, the suggestion of Isaac playing at the school performance spread. At first, it was just a comment here and there, but it soon became something bigger. Even teachers began asking if he would consider performing at St. Bernard Academy's annual talent event. But doubt still accompanied him. What if he failed? Professor Wainwright also appeared to be following the situation closely. In one of the classes, after everyone left, she called him. "So, Mr. Carter, are you enjoying the attention?" He frowned, not understanding the intention of the question. "It's not about that." She smiled, but there was no sympathy there. "Make no mistake, Isaac. People like you need to do much more than just present to be taken seriously." Those words kept echoing in his mind. People like you. On the day of the presentation, the auditorium was packed. Students, teachers, and even some parents were there. Elena wished him good luck before going on stage. Isaac picked up the saxophone and took a deep breath. The microphone captured every noise, every movement. He felt everyone's eyes on him. But most of all, he felt Professor Wainwright's eyes. He started with soft notes, testing the sound. Then, without hesitation, he let the music flow. Unlike the first time in the classroom, now he wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He was just playing because he wanted to, and this time, no one could ignore it. The melody grew, filling every corner of the auditorium. He incorporated snippets of songs he heard his father play his entire life, mixing classic jazz influences with a modern twist. Each note carried its identity, its story. The audience reacted, differently than in the classroom. There wasn't just stunned silence. There was admiration. Some had their eyes closed, absorbing every sound. Others began to clap in time to the music. When he finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Isaac put down the saxophone, feeling a rush of adrenaline and relief. He looked out into the audience and found Professor Wainwright. For once, she had nothing to say. Isaac left the stage, with his hands still shaking. But it wasn't nervousness. It was the energy of the moment, the certainty that something had changed. He passed through the halls of the auditorium under different looks. Not of doubt or contempt, but of respect. Elena found him first. "My God, Isaac, that was incredible. Did you see how everyone reacted?" He smiled, something rare for him. "I think so." Other students began to approach, some who had never spoken to him before. Troy Matthews, who used to make fun of him, walked by and muttered, "It was cool. I mean, for a jazz show." It was the closest thing to a compliment Troy could give. Isaac just shook his head, without needing to say anything. But the person he most wanted to see hadn't shown up yet. Just as he was about to leave, Professor Wainwright appeared at the door. She didn't seem angry nor pleased. His face was an enigma. For a moment, Isaac thought she was going to say something important, acknowledge his talent, admit that she underestimated him. But all she did was adjust her glasses and say, "Nice presentation, Mr. Carter." And then he simply turned his back and left. Elena looked at Isaac, waiting for some reaction. "And there? Won't you say anything?" He took a deep breath. "I don't need it." Because deep down, she already knew the truth. And best of all, now the world knew too. A week after the presentation, Isaac realized how things had changed. At school, people who previously ignored him now greeted him in the hallways. Some still didn't know how to act around him, but that didn't matter. He was no longer invisible. In history class, Professor Wainwright remained the same, strict, severe, maintaining her usual posture. But something had changed between them. When she asked him a question about music's impact on American culture, she looked straight at him. Isaac raised his hand. This time, she called him first. He gave his answer confidently, without hesitation. And in the end, for the first time, she nodded slightly. After class, while he was putting his notebook in his backpack, he received a tap on the shoulder. It was Elena. "So, The city's jazz festival is next month. You should play." Isaac laughed. "Festival? This is too big for me." "Serious? Because last week you thought a school presentation was too big too." He didn't respond right away. He just stood there reflecting. Elena smiled. "Think about it. That night, when he got home, he found his father in the living room, cleaning the old saxophone. You know, someone told me that they're going to open a stage for new talent at the jazz festival." Isaac frowned. "Have you and Elena been talking?" The father laughed. "Perhaps, but the decision is yours." Isaac looked at the saxophone and thought about everything that had happened. How music had been his voice when no one heard him. How he had shown the world who he was without having to shout. He took the instrument from his father's hands, feeling its familiar weight. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. He smiled. "Sign me up for this festival." The father smiled back, and in that moment, Isaac knew this was just the first of many times his music would make the world stop and listen.